Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. I know you can tell we're not in the studio. We are like you at home. ORCA Media had to close down because of the virus, and the college where they're located closed its doors as well. So Ben and Eric and I decided to find some alternative way to reach out and to keep our program going. And so here we are. We hope you enjoy it, and we love some feedback. If we can do things a little bit better, this is the first time we're trying this, and we have a marvelous guest on who is kind enough to be sort of our guinea pig today, because it's April Fool's, right, John? I want to introduce you to John Klar, who is a Republican candidate for governor. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. You have been on before, and John asked if he could come on the show because we're going to be making a little announcement for him, and we wanted to thank him for giving us this opportunity. And joining me is Ben Kinsley, who's co-host, co-producer, and a sponsor of our show. Ben, you want to give that little intro of your business that you do?
Sure. Yeah, I have a consulting firm called Imperium Advisors, which really started out as a public policy research and development organization, and pretty quickly realized that it's not enough to have a good idea. You also have to be able to sell that idea. So with that, we quickly expanded into a whole bunch of different areas, including strategic communications, government relations work, social media, a whole bunch of different things that we are now involved in. So if you have a nonprofit or political organization and are looking to find your audience and get your word out, reach out to us. You can find us at imperiumvt.com.
Good job getting that down. Huh?
Working the elevator pitch.
Ben is a serious policy wonk. He's really great. So check him out. Anyway,
I've been called that.
Wonk, yes. John, you've been on the show before, and we've always asked our guests to talk a little bit about themselves, and you have certainly got a great background. We love the pictures on Facebook of your animals, but if you could tell a little bit about your background, that'd be great.
Well, it's to put it in a short form, I have been an attorney in the Connecticut bar since 1989 in good standing. I focused on tax law in law school, and I was a tax attorney for several years with an accountancy firm, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers. And then I opened my own practice in Connecticut. For 7 years, I practiced as a criminal defense attorney and litigator. I got very sick with Lyme disease, moved to Vermont, where my family have always been from many generations, and started farming. And so I kind of kept one foot in the legal world, but mostly, as you see, I've raised a lot of animals, not very much money, but I love sharing with people my experiences, and I've written for Mother Earth News for a number of years, and I write for a lot of other publications, so I started writing as well. So that's my blend. I'm a farmer first and a lawyer second.
That's good. Well, Price Waterhouse is, we know that word, so we know that firm. That's a great background. But seriously, the pictures you have of your animals, we really love it. It's great. So John is here because next week he is going to unveil this amazing manifesto, he calls it, the 2020 Vermont Farming Manifesto. And it is pages and pages. And I must tell you, John, I was very impressed. There's so many suggestions in here about how to turn the tide here in Vermont, how to, maybe I tell you what, instead of me saying it, because I want you to know I read this word for word, but maybe you could give us a little overview of what the package is that you've put together here.
Well, I'm squirming now because you brought a policy wonk along, and so I feel like I'm under the.
I'll go easy, I promise.
Yeah, he will.
No, I actually invite that. I really want to see it as a work in progress with all hands on deck to help our economy and our future. So I welcome your insights, Ben. Plus, you could package the message and help convey it to people. So to try to give you my elevator pitch on this as we continue to develop it, there are 4 basic elements that you may have noticed. 1 is, what is our problem? 2 is our proposed solution. 3 is, how do we pay for it? And 4 is, how does that contrast with what's currently being done in our legislature, which is zilch or negative. So the primary emphasis here is, let's say, economic. It's called the farming plan, but the benefits of this will benefit all farming, all businesses in Vermont. To reverse what's happened over the last 80 years in Vermont is that as we've lost farms, we've lost the satellite businesses that thrived off of farms. The feed dealers, the equipment dealers, the businesses that, the veterinarians, those who did repairs. I mean, there were so many, the agriculture was the foundation for Vermont. To restore that can't be done overnight. But if we are to rebuild communities, then farming is certainly part of it. And as we see right now in our current national situation, we've become dependent on food from very far away, including China, and we have less healthy food, more environmentally destructive food, and eventually that could be very, very expensive food, both environmentally and economically. So in contrast, and we could talk about how we pay for it, but in contrast, the plans being proposed to us as a prosperity solution for Vermont depend on taking our tax dollars, growing the government and its regulations, then buying solar panels and EV cars and other things that are not manufactured in Vermont. This is the opposite of a fundamental economic productivity cycle. You either produce goods or you increase worker productivity, otherwise you are losing wealth. And for decades, we've been losing wealth overseas through wage competition and through technological advances. We're all displacing workers. Well, farming is our brand. We are the #1 locavore state in the country. Vermont has always done well selling high quality foods to Boston and other places. We're too focused on conventional dairy. And we have a huge number of markets that are just now opening. And guess what, Pat? A lot of young people are already into this and want to move to Vermont and want it to be economically viable. And it's very stifling for them because we have too many regs and our property taxes are too high, amongst other things. So this is a layered, integrated idea, and I hope you see that economically it is quite in contrast with the lack of economic initiative from our current administration, whether it's $10,000 payments to out-of-staters or let's bring Keno to Vermont. I mean, we have seen an intellectual bankruptcy that we also see in the Democrats right now. You're not going to get this plan from Dave Zuckerman and Rebecca Holcomb. They may have a lot of money, but they don't have any ideas. Their whole ideas were global warming solutions and TCI, in which they were going to ram down our throats to help a select number of businesses for a one-time so-called benefit to our economy. It does not benefit our economy. There's no prosperity in it. There's only more government, more regs, and helping out-of-state, if not out-of-country businesses. So that was a long-winded way to take 13 pages of an outline and try to condense it.
Well, because I think for the viewers, I'd love to take this kind of, as you said, layer by layer, and so that they can get the whole picture. But I must say, the section that you wrote on food really got to me because I went to Price Chopper today and did my 6 foot away from everybody. But I was really thinking about what you said about local food versus the food that's brought in from who knows where. And it really got to me. So I'm anxious to have that conversation when we get to that part in the in your document here. So and then just give me the thing and I'll keep quiet here. But you talked about the foundation of economic growth is productivity. You mentioned that just a little while ago. And not the provision of services, which I found interesting. Could you explain what you meant by that? You have so many quotable phrases in this document, but economic growth is productivity, not providing services.
And this is a fundamental principle of economics. Once you explain it to people, it's very commonsensical. In fact, you might make a comparison to arts, okay? You can't have a big arts program with a full orchestra unless you have sufficient growth in your economy to pay the people to play the violins and to build the theater, Okay. We could say the same about the environment. We see actually the worse economically a country does, like the Amazon or China, the less resources they have to divert to cleaning up the environment. In the case of any economic system, when you have productivity and you have growth and you manufacture goods, then you can have services. In an economic perspective, looking at America, for 150 years, we've been the innovators of new technologies. So let's say we use a toaster as an example. So we build toasters. We sell toasters to the whole world. The whole world wants toasters. And after a while, China and other countries figure out, guess what? We can build toasters too. So then we sell them the toaster making machines. We sell them the industrial capacity because we're machine makers to make toasters. Now, guess what? They're selling us toasters, and they're selling us toasters at a much lower wage cost. And they're now producing with their goods, their raw materials, shipping over to us, and now we are consuming toasters. In time, kind of like a game of Monopoly, guess where all the money ends up? So what do we develop? We develop a digital toaster, or we develop something else. Now, over time, we have seen these technological advances and these industrial shifts happen, and now we see it with our food supply. And what's not in that manifesto is right now, 40 million pigs just died in China due to a pig virus. They've lost a huge number of chickens. Okay, so a lot of our food in the world is succumbing to an industrialization of food, which you can't do as well as you can for toasters. Okay, because you can ship a toaster from far away without it losing its quality or rotting or needing to be refrigerated. When you start doing this with food, 70% of the antibiotics in this country are used in animals. All right, and you're breeding pathogens. You're not just treating animals poorly. You're not just treating the workers on the farms poorly. You're creating waste in what was once, a benefit, an asset to have manure. When you have 30,000 sows in one facility in Virginia, you have lagoons of toxic manure that are so potent that people are overcome by the fumes and die and fall into the pits. All right, so you're taking something healthy and turning it into an industrial toxin. Back to your issue of productivity. If you have everybody work for the government because you had a thriving economy, and you start paying people in government are a service sector. We can't all be masseuses unless somebody has a wage to pay the masseuse. You can't have a government of masseuses. You can't have a government of people that are all specialized. With more and more people we see growing, particularly in our Department of Agriculture, even though the number of farms goes down. Is Vermont an attractive place for a large corporation to come and build a big factory? We have empty factory buildings in Springfield. We could try. We have enterprise credits, but traditionally Vermont's never been a good place that way. Here's the Silicon Valley of the future. If we have a healthy environment with clean water, clean air, and a lot of healthy local food, which is very attractive to young people, more and more people can work from their computers. That's the new economy. That, by the way, is largely a service economy, but also it's service that can be integral to productivity, to manufacturing other places. People can work from home. But Vermont isn't going to suddenly start manufacturing computers and cell phones. That's a nationwide problem. It's a global problem. It's not one side or the other's fault that technological advances have benefited us all but displaced workers. If Vermont were to grow on its existing brand of farming, it would become a more attractive place for other businesses to come locate, including factories, including building, the helmet factory in Newport. Newport and the Northeast Kingdom desperately needs industry. And why would someone come build there? Well, they might like local schools. They might not want a big city school. The things that are wonderful about our state are the things we should be building upon. And buying a bunch of Chinese solar panels and a bunch of Japanese EV cars is doing nothing to grow our productivity. It is actually taking our money away and sending it to another area's productivity, whether nationally or internationally. Did that question? I hope.
Yep, that's good.
So I have a couple questions here. The first one, when you define agriculture, agriculture is not just food, right? Are we talking hemp and marijuana as well in your definition of agriculture and the potential for growth here in Vermont?
And that's a very good question, and Pat already knows the answer. We're talking about food production. And the reason is that food is the foundation for everything else. In fact, you need food even to give to your cellist and your violinist and your saxophone player. Monsanto and other companies, and Cargill, et cetera, they know that there are profits in farming. There's a writer named Wendell Berry who's been writing about this for 50 years. He's still a good resource because he's been warning us about what happens when we debase ourselves by debasing our food supply. Of course, we have more and more health crises from poor food. So in answer to your question, no, it would not include hemp. It would also not include the log industry, which might make a lot of people unhappy, but perhaps it could be expanded to that. It would include sugar producers. What is more Vermont than maple syrup? And they're struggling from industrial competition. So what we're proposing is literally a tax credit against income and real estate taxes for production of, and see a national, right now there are threats to the food supply, both internationally from China, Chile, other foods that are not very well inspected, that are not fresh, that come from soils that have been industrially worked, and so use a huge amount of fossil fuels and pollution to produce those foods. There's a lot of labor abuse, but also those soils over time are depleted because they're not using animal manure as their form of regeneration. They're using fossil fuel created, factory generated chemicals, basically, that they spray on the ground. And in time, you lose your trace minerals. So in answer to your question, Ben, in a long-winded way, no, we would restrict it to food. We would have to define that a little better without having a 700-page legislative document. But there are there's a huge demand out of state for the Vermont brand in the form of meats, value-added meats, jerkies. The whole beef industry is shifting towards that. As I mentioned in the video that'll be out next week, we have a huge coffee making industry in Vermont, but we don't grow coffee. There's something quite almost insane about that. We're never going to grow coffee. Hemp is a dead market anyway. I said so last year, the year before, to any farmers who are getting into it. I said, don't get into hemp. You're going to overproduce. I mean, if we had a hemp factory to start making hemp socks and hemp shirts, then maybe hemp has a market as an alternative to cotton and wool. But as far as for CBD oil, no, it doesn't qualify as food. I guess you can eat it, but no, we're talking about nutrition. And in time, we would be positioning Vermont as other areas with population growth, like particularly Massachusetts, convert over their agricultural land to subdivisions like we see in Chittenden County, and you cannot reclaim that land overnight. So we actually have this huge future growth industry that will always be here that is not based on factories in food production. People will always need food, and there will always be people who will, outside of Vermont, will pay a premium for the Vermont man, not just our cheese and not just our milk, a whole gamut of products that are yet to be developed.
I think, John, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but when we have the farms, they will in turn create more work in the equipment, in fertilizers, and other things that support them. So the more farms that are productive and more land that's used, there'll be more businesses established to support the farms, correct?
Yes, they're what I call ancillary or satellite businesses. They have disappeared. We can reverse that cycle. If we were to stimulate farmers, and we're actually just stimulating the people to use their own capital, their own money, their own land, and their own labor, and they get a tax break as an incentive, quote unquote. Well, what happens then? More feed is sold, more hay is sold, more equipment is sold, more other people will want to live here. There is a whole growth rate that will happen with this, but also by paring back Act 250 more to its original intentions, a lot of businesses are being stifled right now, in addition to farmers who would benefit from paring back some of those regulations, which they're actually looking to extend to farms. Farms are responsible for 40% of the water pollution in Vermont, but they're being burdened with about 80%, as far as I can see, of the compliance regulations. You don't hear in Chittenden they're being told to stop their runoff with their rapid suburban and urban growth, which they regard as some kind of inexorable duty towards progress. It is progress towards what? It is progress towards dependency and pollution. We need farms. We have people ridiculing farmers and cows. What is our landscape to tourism? And look at the incongruity again. Those who are telling Vermonters we have to pay a gas tax because we drive pickups a long way to our jobs. We like a rural world, but you're not. Meanwhile, our government is being used to pay money millions of dollars over the years to be tourists, to advertise tourism so that people will come here from out of state to do what? Drive around in cars. To look at what? Cows. So if we are to have a tourism industry, which I'm not being negative on, then we need the farms. The farms are so integrated to everything about our culture, our economy, and most importantly, our vital food supply. We should be building on that. And all of those things are benefiting from farmers. If the farms are gone and the cows are gone, and we sequester carbon in trees everywhere, we have no pastures, we have no views, we have no moo cows that people can come see in their SUV Escalades from all over the place. What about our hotels and our restaurants? They all benefit from tourism. What are people coming here to see? Not more Walmarts and Applebee's. They're coming here to see something unique culturally, our farming, our local restaurants. There's nothing better than a home baked goods store and a local restaurant like they used to have everywhere, instead of becoming homogenized like this whole nation with large conglomerate entities.
I find it interesting that the legislature for years would talk about working landscapes and how important that is. But now they're changing towards we should all move downtown. And this way, and in your proposal, the land would be farmed, and it would be a working landscape, which would be of interest to our tourists who ride around, want to visit a farm, see the animals, watch a farmer work. Would be something to see and do when you come to Vermont, I think.
Well, that's agritourism. And in fact, you hit on something which, as I quote from the Manifesto, I quote from the TCI. The TCI, if you look at it, which is funded by the Rockefeller brothers and others who have no idea what farming is or what Vermont culture is, and from far away in Washington, D.C., are telling us how the solution to the world's problems is to get everybody to move into the cities. Now, if you read the TCI and the supporting documents that were commissioned with an end goal of getting us all to buy solar panels and electric cars from Rutgers University, it is easy to dismantle. So what they, and now to other parts of the country, what they identify is that the two chief costs for people and workers and regular people, the two chief costs are housing and transportation. So in an area where there is growth in an urban area, when you have increased jobs and wages, it starts to drive up the prices of housing, okay? So people start to move further out of that area where there's more affordable housing. But now they have increased transportation costs and more vehicle miles driven, VMD. This is the big measure of TCI. So what they say is in the TCI that they want to increase the costs of the travel component to force people to not have more vehicle miles driven and keep them in the cities.
Right. I can't imagine that would happen.
We moved out of the cities and into the woods. We've always been in the woods. We've always been in a rural area. We choose that culture. We like that culture. And harder it's become to work from home and in the rural areas because the taxes are so high on our real estate because they're valued for their development value. And so they're really pushing us who want to live in the woods, not because we're going to get rich, not because we have 14 different kinds of restaurants to go to, but literally because we like to listen to the bluebirds and the sparrows and the crows and the whole cacophony with robins and everything every morning. Red-winged blackbirds are here now. They're the sign of spring. We want to live in the woods. We are not people that are moving out of the urban areas into the country. We're people in the country that are being attacked by the city mice and herded into the cities. Leave us alone. Thank you.
There you go. Ben, you have a question?
So I read TCI in a similar way. I think there's definitely a move towards urbanization in TCI and similar efforts. I think you hit on something with what some of the hypocrisies in that are, and there's certainly other ways of addressing those concerns that don't leave people who live a rural lifestyle out in the cold. One thing I want to come back to that you'd mentioned earlier on was young people getting involved in farming, and one of the biggest obstacles to that is if you don't have a established family farm, it's really hard to break into agriculture because it's capital intensive, especially at the beginning. You have to buy land, you have to buy equipment, you have to buy a barn, oftentimes, or some sort of storage facility. And banks these days are really not willing to front the cost for those types of things. They're very reluctant to give out business loans to people who are starting agricultural enterprises. So what do you think the solution is to lower those barriers of entry for people that are just getting into farming, first generation farmers?
Well, again, Pat's already read, she knows, it's in the manifesto. So when we reduce property taxes in particular, we are not actually, and some other business owners will complain, we are not actually giving a tax benefit to those entrepreneurs who either are or wish to move into farming. We're removing an unnatural barrier. America now imports 74% of our land, mostly from Australia. If I lived in Europe for years, the government there subsidized farms. They value farming. They understand it. And to just skip off a little bit of the side for a moment, what the TCI does not acknowledge, that when you herd everybody into the cities, somebody's still growing our food. Where does it come from? It magically descends from the shoemaker's elves and fills up their stocks, their shelves every day, all wrapped in plastic and nicely processed from Mexican workers down in Texas. And I'm not bashing immigrant labor, but that's a lot of those workers are in some of the worst, most dangerous working conditions. When you buy a hamburger, it has the body parts of 1,000 cows in it on average, instead of knowing where your hamburger came from and how the animal was treated. When you push people into the cities, you're ignoring all those other ancillary expenses of production as if they were not incurred. So as to the young people, and answering your question and looking in that big picture, what we're proposing to do, there are already a lot. We've all met them. If we've been to farmers markets, and I've met so many of them, and I could get you the numbers. I don't know what the current numbers are. The Department of Ag knows this. Many of the efforts of the Department of Ag are sitting there as a framework and not really being used, because however well-intentioned, you cannot overcome the fact that the property taxes are so high. And you're correct, it's very capital intensive, Ben. Clearly has some insights, particularly for animal husbandry. But we're not talking about financing it. We're not talking about subsidizing it. We're talking about getting government out of government and high taxes and high schools costs and high pension expenses and extraordinarily high welfare benefits that we all end up paying for. You know, it doesn't come magically down from the federal government. It all goes into debt and money supply. So we put so much in the way that it's tragic for those young people who do have the money. Maybe they have a family who will back them. You're right, the banks won't do it. Why? Because it's not profitable historically. Who would invest right now in dairy? And in fact, most of our large dairies are already owned by the banks indirectly. And most of the farmers are working for free or less than that, especially milk prices are poor again now. For who? Banks. So any bank worth its salt would not be funding conventional dairy or even organic, because fewer people drink milk, and productivity gains have occurred also in milk. So number one, we get out of the way. Number two, and by the way, a lot of people, that will keep some people to stick at it. We're already doing it. Number two, we utilize existing programs in Vermont. We increased the subsidy for low-income people to buy local food with coupons. We increased the agricultural centers that the Department of Agriculture has worked on to help consolidate these foods so that they can be more efficiently and profitably distributed. We grow more products and give people more elbow room. So if you're in a break-even farm right now, you would suddenly be a profitable farm with these credits. And that would lead other actors to come in, other, let's call them stakeholders, because that's the magic word. More stakeholders will come. There are a lot of people, especially now with this going on in our nation, who are going to flee the cities and appreciate that they want to live in the country. Maybe have been waiting to do so. If you give them the opportunity, no, not a one-time payment of $10,000 to come here and set up your laptop, potentially a burden on us when you lose your job, okay? How about you bring your capital, you bring your labor, and you produce a good, and then you get a benefit back in exchange for that production. SLAWs, I mean, coleslaw. How about turnip slaw? Have you ever had turnip slaw? It's delicious. It's really good. My wife found it. It's a Pennsylvania Dutch recipe. You could develop that. We've done it. We have perhaps more varieties of salsa produced in Vermont, that Mexican food. How many foods could we produce? We have not really begun to tap into what this market could be. And it's a win-win, because once we start building on it, other metropolitan areas cannot compete with us. You can't really do this in the Bronx. Okay, you can do a certain amount of farming. And also, in answer to your question, Ben, not all farming ventures require a large tract of land or a lot of equipment. You can start out and buy your feed if you have animals. You can start out and do vegetables. You could do hydroponics. They have a lot of new technologies there. All food production. So just getting out of the way. We're not talking about government becoming a socialist entity that creates the business model. We're talking about letting people innovate and letting entrepreneurs do what they want to do anyway. And if you want to bring young people here, they're already here. We just need to keep them here. Not just our people, but young people. If they want to move here from Zimbabwe and farm, I'm all for it, because we will all benefit from that. If they have a balanced employment, this is balanced with the ecosystem, balanced with the economy. It'll grow families, grow local communities. I meet people all the time, and they move here because they want the fresh air and they don't want to have the urban problems for their children growing up in lovely little Vermont towns that are otherwise declining. I hope that was responsive. Ben, hit me again. Did I hit you?
I have two follow-up questions to that. First one, so the property tax structure that you're envisioning, we already have a program called Current Use in place, which exempts property taxes on lands being used for agriculture, logging, conservation, that type of thing, past 2 acres. So if you have a house and 100 acres, the first 2 acres get taxed at your homestead property tax rate. The other 98 acres could be tax-free, essentially. How does the program you're envisioning differ from that?
It differs, but it's really on top of that. First of all, current use, which I was in with my farm for a number of years, there are a lot of abuses there, and it like Act 250 continues to sprawl and have more and more restrictions. So if you're not in current use, because a lot of people are not in current use, you could still benefit from this. You would still get a benefit against your 2 acres, even with your homestead exemption. Taxes are high here. Okay, the real estate taxes are very high. So it would also be limited to 1/2 of your property tax, so there is a cap on it. What we're proposing now is a 25% of gross sales tax credit against income and against property taxes. So 25% each. So if you grew $10,000 worth of vegetables and you were break even on your costs, you'd get a $5,000 combined benefit, $2,500 as an income tax credit, which we give an earned income, comparable thing, but it's linked to production, not, just, so if you're in current use, you benefit. But right now, a lot of people are in current use who are wealthy developers who buy 200-acre tracts and put it in current use so they get a tax break. They don't produce any food at all. And there are a lot of abuses that go on, and a lot of it is timber. But also, a lot of farms are just not in current use. You have to have 25 acres minimum to be in current use. This would allow people who don't have a smaller acreage, particularly for like vegetable production, they could still get a benefit. Right now, they cannot. People could still benefit from the land trust. And you mentioned young people. Some people lease. So if you were leasing, you could still get the income tax credit. You just wouldn't get the property tax credit. If you have an incentive, though, to own property because it is not so burdensome to pay the property taxes. So that's how it integrates with the various existing programs and emphasizes a premium on food production. There's also an issue here, just let me throw in quickly, of food security. As we see right now, if there's an interruption with our fiat currency or our trucking from out west, guess where your food comes from? You don't have any. All right, so we have an incentive right now. People can see this. We need more local food. It's a long-term plan with great benefit. And we could phase these out in some years, by the way. This doesn't have to be, indefinite. Once it gets boosted, once we get productivity boosted, all those add-on benefits occur. Plus we shrink government, so we bring down taxes for everybody. Your other follow-on question, Ben, is there another one?
Yeah, I have two more follow-up questions now. But the first one is there's a bill that's been going around the legislature. It hasn't gotten a whole lot of traction yet, but it was kicking around a little bit earlier this year, that would incentivize school districts to purchase local foods, locally produced foods, for school lunch programs. Is that something that you've looked at or think fits into your plan in some way?
I don't know that I've looked at the specific bill, but I believe the Farm to Plate program and some other agricultural programs steer towards that way. Middlebury College and other colleges try to outsource, get all their food that way. Right now, if you look at the media, there's a huge boom in locally produced meats and other foods all across the country where they can get them. And I talk to farmers, and they're going to sell out fast because suddenly people want food they can trust. How do you get it free of coronavirus? Well, you get it locally. How do you get quality? People are becoming acutely overnight aware of these health issues. So that's a wonderful program, and actually would dovetail to our broader Act 46 repeal program, which is not addressed specifically or comprehensively in this manifesto. But we need a blended approach to help restore our local schools and local control of schools, and that is one aspect. And if we had savings in our runaway administrative expenses for our school system, those could quickly fund additional money that could be funneled back into productivity. So if you do spend money for local food for your students, you're going to have healthier kids, lower healthcare costs for lower rates of hypertension, high blood pressure, obesity. We need to teach people about where their food comes from, by the way. That comes back to what Pat was mentioning with agritourism, becomes an educational aspect. We eat too many carbohydrates. We eat too much high fructose corn syrup that comes from our 91.7 million acres of corn production, industrial corn production, most of it this year alone, or last year in the U.S. So absolutely, I support that program, but there is actually, there are a bunch of programs that are in place that are not being fully utilized. And this would help all of those programs at very low, if any, cost. It's really self-funding.
So
I can see Pat has a question, so I'll let her ask her question first.
I just want to put John's proposal in his manifesto into some visual here. The one side that you have, John, is property tax credits, and it's a very complex formula. You hit upon it a little while ago, but not the whole plan. Which then, because you're obviously getting less revenue coming in, you also have, I didn't count how many areas you have here, but you have one recommendation after another about how to save money in government, in pension reform, in welfare reform. And I think so. It's a manifesto that balances income and expense. And I don't know how you can explain that tax credit proposal. I had asked John if we could put it in some kind of a visual, but it is complex, but maybe you could give it a little shot, and then we can go through some of your recommendations on how things need to be streamlined on the other side of the equation.
Well, I think that's a really great question. So I don't believe in economic fabrications. I've studied economics. So for instance, I've heard people say that paying people $10,000 to come here is going to generate like $1.8 million in revenue. And they have fabricated that in some dark corner somewhere and said, oh yeah, well, if you earn this much money for 30 years and they live forever and they never use any of our, I mean, it's a fiction. For me to pretend to tell you how many people are out there who would avail themselves of this program, I mean, you, Pat, depending on where you live, you could raise a cow in your backyard. It would take you 2 years. You would buy grain and hay. You'd probably buy some fencing in a barn, unless you've got one or you're going to keep it in the garage. I have sheep in my garage right now, but my landlord knows, so it's okay. Maybe you wouldn't keep a cow in your garage, but you could sell that cow as grass-fed or whatever, maybe organic, local meat, and get it. And if you sold it for $3,000, you get a $1,500 tax credit. I can't tell you how many people will come in here and do that. But what I can say is that TCI proponents are scrambling, and this is one of the purposes of this, is to highlight in contrast how absurd their plans are. They are pitching to us economic prosperity through the TCI and Global Warming Solutions Act. Have they procured for us how much money that's going to make? No. They've actually obscured how much money it's going to lose us and how much will go to other states because of our rural nature. Will actually be penalized under the TCI, as Rob Roper has explained in better detail. So, you know, if we're going to be if we're going to be fair, if we're going to be honest, then we're going to say, no, I don't know how much it's going to cost, but I do know that every dollar we spend, we will get some money back, and it won't go to China or Japan or some other factory in California. It won't have the illusion of helping the environment, which manufacturing solar panels costs a lot of fossil fuels and a lot of mined materials. They don't count that in how much, in 2030, we'll have a 25% reduction. Are they counting the short-term explosion of industrial production that comes about manufacturing all of these solar panels at state mandate? No, they don't. They're not counting those costs. So what I'm saying is we don't have those costs. We're not going to cause all kind of environmental contamination. Healthier food, more food security, growing our economy, preserving our farmland. Gee, how much does that cost? I don't care. How much do you think you can afford not to do it? It will self-fund. If we try to cut back how much we're spending on putting people on Suboxone on a one-way street with no real resources to get them off, I'm a recovery coach. I work in that area. That's a plan to help people by investing in existing resources to help people get off Suboxone who want to, who then may be volunteers to help get other people off Suboxone. Reverses a very expensive cycle. Can I tell you how much money I can save you in that? I won't know until we do it, but common sense dictates it'll work. Same thing with some of the other things we're talking about. So when it comes to food production, and you say it's a complex formula, but actually it's really kind of simple. It's 50% total credit on the first $30,000 of gross sales. You have to file your tax return. So as far as fraud, if you want to commit fraud, people can be doing that anyway. This is a real attraction in this day and age, especially for so many people. Just conservatives? No. Just liberals? No. Anybody who wants a healthier lifestyle and healthier food. So no, I couldn't, if I created a chart for you, I would be creating a fiction for you. Either people can see the common sense and try this. We certainly spend an awful lot of money. We're spending $53 million a year to clean up Lake Champlain. And that's a boondoggle too. And I'll say why. I mean, I'm not saying I don't want to clean up Lake Champlain, just the opposite. In Rutland, they have the 3-acre rule, and they figure it was going to cost $300 million to make them retroactively fit all their storm drains so the water wouldn't run off from Rutland into the lake anymore. So at $300 million, where do you spend that? Well, first you have to dig up all the ground with diesel-operated facility. You're turning out more fossil fuel consumption. Lay pipes, put in what, asphalt again with drains? Where are the pipes made? Out of plastic, which is fossil fuel based? I mean, do they analyze the environmental investments and consumption to retroactively lay these pipes? No, they don't. And where does that go? It goes in the air. Oh, it lands on the trees to get sequestered. I mean, no, but they're not doing the analysis that you're asking me to do. They're doing a boondoggle. And so taxpayers have to judge, especially in contrast, what makes common sense. It's a win-win-win to invest in local farms, local farming communities, and young people who want to. And how much is it going to cost? I don't know. It'll pay for itself. And as you see in my list of other areas where we can save money, like we know there's wealth, we know that the pensions need to be repaired. We know that our schools costs are not sustainable. So somebody say, well, how are you going to fix it? Well, we have a plan. We're coming out with Act 46 repeal. But my response is, well, how do you think you could keep spending it this way? It's unsustainable. We have fewer and fewer students and higher and higher salaries and more teachers. You can't keep doing it. So everything about what we're doing on so many levels, and with Ben's comment, to have more of that food sold back into the market for schools, absolutely. Healthier kids, more educated kids, and then putting our money back into our own economy and our own communities. Money well spent.
Because of the popularity of farmers markets. I mean, every time I go to, of course, now we're not going anywhere, but when farmers markets are here, it's hard to walk around in the crowd because they're all wanting to be there and to buy the fresh meats and the vegetables and all the things that are offered at the farmers market. Could we talk about, I know, Ben and I, one of our favorite topics is pension reform. That's one, and I'd like to talk about that and a couple of other ones that are very near and dear to people, but we're figuring the pension liability is skyrocketing these days because of the virus.
So you may have seen that, and I didn't want to cut you off there, but Beth Pierce, I read, I think yesterday or today, has said I'm a little stunned here. So our treasurer, Beth Pierce, has said that yes, the market inflicted a hit on our pension investments, but people need to understand that this is over a long period of time, and in a number of years, we'll recoup these benefits. Let's have a frank conversation about the pensions. One of the reasons the pensions have been one of the top issues on our policy list and my policy list since last fall. I didn't just pop up about it now. It is literally a fraud which has been perpetrated against our teachers and state workers. Not just teachers, it's people who drive the snow plows for us.
Right.
Some of them, most of them, are counting on that as a resource in their elderly. That thing has been eviscerated. So first of all, the $4.6 billion deficiency that they have acknowledged is built on a projection that all existing investments in the pensions will earn 7.5% interest for the next, or return dividends or interest for the next 30 years. That is a
certainly not
certifiable fraudulent. Okay, it's not now, and I've been saying, and Dave Coates and others have been saying it, left or right, it doesn't matter. Math is math. And whether one's a liberal or a conservative, we should pay our teachers. And they're actually asked to do a very complex job now because we have more behavioral issues and poverty and other issues in our schools than ever. They're being lied to, and in the end, they're pitching teachers and state workers against taxpayers because we can't afford it. We have the second highest education costs in the country as a function of income. We have one of the most underfunded pensions. Now, Beth Pierce will tell you this, that in the 07, 08, and by the way, I know a bit about investing, okay? In 07, 08 financial collapse, our pensions had all their money in the market. So about a year later, after taking all of those losses to capital, to principal, they pulled it out. They faced the boom, okay? So then they didn't earn their returns on the rebound. Now, just about 6 months ago, she reported they had put I think it was 71% of their assets were back in the market. So they were weighted in stocks because you couldn't earn any money with low interest rates in bonds. So this entire pension investment had been put back in the stocks just in time to keep this hit on principal. This is the exact opposite of how you hope to invest. They have timed the losses in principal, and they have not timed the rebound. Now she says, don't worry, it'll rebound. Every 1% that projected 7.5% is not achieved on our investments adds $600 million nearly to the 4.6% deficiency. And now we've lost probably, she has not told us, I'd love to hear about it because they won't want to tell us. We've probably lost 25 to 40% so far in the principal. And of course, maybe now she's delaying pulling it out again. There may be penalties or delays in doing that. Well, how many years do you have to go at your 7.5%? We have the longest running stock market boom in the history of this country, and they were invested heavily in it right at the peak. And now they're telling us we're going to earn, don't worry, we'll earn it back. It's a crisis. And I wrote an article about this recently in the state about basically they're in free for all. If you take that 1% drop and you multiply it times, let's say 4, so you're only going to earn 3.5% on your investments, which, by the way, have just dropped by billions of dollars. Okay, so now by 4 times $600 million, you add $2.5 billion. So now you're not at 4.6 billion, you're at $7 billion in the red, not counting what you've lost in principal right now. The true number, if we had it analyzed, and there's been a call to have it analyzed, and that put us in the red, by the way. That's why we got dropped in our credit rating last year. Vermont has a negative net worth now in the state, and the reason is the pensions. And it's time to drag that out in the light. And our legislature said, Mitzi Johnson said just a few months ago, they were not going to take up the pension. They've been underfunding it. This is a pathological refusal. And they've been pulling the money out of teachers' pockets to pay for other projects, including their TCI and other boondoggles. They want to keep pulling money out of our pockets. And they're not going to sell enough pot at 20% to shore up the pensions, okay? They don't have a solution. It's a serious problem. Sorry, thank you. I get upset about it.
what's scaring me is we're going to be operating, I think, in the deficit because of what's happening with the virus. And when it's all sort of said and done, we may have to go back and borrow lots of money. And at what cost? Because of the liability in our pension plan, it may cost us a fortune to borrow money. Don't you? I think that's what might happen.
We're looking probably at 150 million as we sit today, and that's just a projection based off of the last 2 weeks, and it's not going to be pretty.
In the hole, then? 150
million in the hole for the current fiscal year, and a bigger hole next year.
Well, anyway, I would imagine our ratings go down. It's really bad.
Well, and so what I also read about in a recent American Thinker article, which discusses the issue of pensions more broadly for the whole nation, you know, there are a number of states who have their pensions funded at 100%. There are some as low as like 35%. Vermont's is I think in the 50s. I forget. There's a chart there linked. But here's the thing. Under the law, teachers and others have had a false sense, and their unions have backed this, that no matter what, they'll get paid. And that's a big delusion. And I cite a law review, a law analysis from the Cleveland Federal Reserve, I believe, which looked at the fact that the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that in a crisis situation, states do not have to honor those contracts. We're in a crisis situation. So the state of Vermont can actually compel them, they can default on paying the pensions. And that's perceived that they can't do that. But Vermont may have no choice. Where are they going to get it? Are the feds going to bail them out? If the feds were to bail out, because the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, which is a federal entity, which itself is insufficiently funded, only bails out private pensions. It does not bail out state pensions. Why would the federal government issue a bailout that benefited the states that had been most derelict in funding their pensions? That is a moral hazard. And nationally, that's not going to be popular because that would actually reward people who built their house in a flood zone, okay? This legislature has neglected the old Vermont adage of plan for the worst and hope for the best. They have done the opposite. And so the pensions are in very deep threat. Now, what happens if they default on the pensions? Well, then people that were about to retire not only have to work longer, but they're going to divert more of their assets and income to investment. And that's the opposite of what you want to do with an interest rate stimulus. It is the opposite of what you need to spur investment and economic growth. It's a vicious cycle, okay? So the crisis is much bigger than just pension holders. It's going to affect all of us. It's a huge elephant in the living room, and now it needs to be taken out and dealt with. And by the way, I didn't create the problem, so don't blame me that I can't fix it overnight. It's a big problem.
I'm very afraid of next year because you're going to have, as Ben said, this big deficit. Plus, we have to pay for next year. So you put the deficit on top of the normal funding that we need to keep the state going. It's just going to be mind-boggling. It's going to be huge. We have 6 minutes left, and I want to tell people that you have got so many suggestions for healthcare costs, for education. I'm reading some of this list goes on and on. And I think some of your comments about the opioid crisis are just right on. And I would hope people would, once you put this out there, that they would spend the time to read it. I'd like to also talk right now, as we close the show, about all the work you're doing, getting candidates to run, which is very difficult right now to get out and meet people. But you have done yeoman's work in identifying great candidates. You want to talk a little bit about that?
I do, and let me put the plug out there for John Klar for Vermont.com, which is where the manifesto will be posted. It'll also be available in a 2-page summary article, and in there'll be videos. There are going to be a number of different videos chopping this up into chunks where people, if they prefer to, watch something with pictures of my cows and sheep and pigs to make it fun. But I have been, one of the reasons I ran was that I was part of a group of people. We've been a movement all along. I'm just the messenger. The message is that we all share the same goals. And that's why we actually, in a couple of weeks, hope to announce another round of candidates. We have about 10 right now, if we don't count Brooke Page, because he's now not running with our group because of a little friction that you might know about. But we know a number of other candidates that are coming forward. There are great candidates that we look forward to announcing. And we hope out of this farming manifesto, everybody listen up, to find more people willing to run. Many people don't want to run in Vermont because they view it as a progressive state. You can't win unless you're a progressive. That's not true. There is the pendulum is going to swing. People are sick of higher taxes. They're sick of government spending as the solution to every problem that government creates. Okay, many of the economic decline problems we have are created because this government's too big. So if there is a pushback, people need other candidates to run. And so people are also disenchanted with Phil Scott on the conservative side and don't feel that he's been supportive of candidates. And I've been trying to be the opposite of that. We nurture candidates. If people wish to run, we will help you set up a Facebook site. We will help you with campaign finance. We will announce you. We will come to events with you. We are trying to tell all Vermonters that we're actually centrists who don't care if you're red or blue. We want to help reverse the opioid crisis. We want to help improve the school situation. We have chosen these issues that are most complex and most important for all of us so that we might have unity in an election year that's being defined over one person nationally. We Vermonters need to come together and address our problems together. So sorry, I get excited about that too. We have some wonderful people.
One thing our legislature need is one or two more farmers. We have lost. I'm not sure, Ben, do we have one farmer that comes to mind, but there's something about farmers that bring a logic to the conversation that perhaps is missing on occasion in the legislature. So
there's very few that are left in the legislature.
Yeah. Anyway, are we out of time?
There's one.
Yeah,
It was Rodney Graham was the last one. We have some more farmers to announce too, by the way. We have some more good farmers coming forward. So
yeah, because they've got a great way of looking at things, very practical. And I think that's something that should be added to the conversation. Practicality is a good word. John, is there anything else that you can wind up the show with? Because we really appreciate your coming on. I want to make sure that people know that progressives, Democrats, independents, they're all invited to come on. Just give us a call. And we've sent out the letters and stuff and hope they'll take us up on our new format and right from home. How easy can it be? So John, you want to take us out and leave us with a good thought?
We can all appreciate our farmers, whether or not we are farmers. And in addition to that practicality, they're business people, and they have to be frugal, and they have to be creative. Some of the most creative, practical, the word is practical, when they say that necessity is the mother of invention. And farmers do that, and they work 365 days a year. They have a work ethic and an integrity. They're not doing it for the money. And so those are all good attributes, but they're attributes that we could bring to the legislature. You don't have to be a farmer to benefit from those ideals. And so that's what we're setting out to do. We're starting to try a movement that everybody can see the benefits of and come together and have comity, have community, have compassion. Those things that our political fracturing have disintegrated in many corporate or other interests seem to benefit from us backbiting over social issues instead of coming together on the fiscal. So no public access, by the way, so I'm really proud and honored to be contributing to what you do. It's important.
Well, John, thank you so much for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites. Night.